religion, buries his cash in a coffee can, and he makes his decisions down on his knees. He's a full-grown man, and he had a vision of a fire. It burned up all the land. You could call it superstition. You could run just as fast as you can.
Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Reno Freethinkers discussion hangouts. For more information about the Reno Freethinkers, you can find us on the web at renofreethinkers.org, on meetup.com, and on Facebook. We're also on Google Plus and YouTube as Reno Freethinkers !! Don't ask. Today's discussion is about Noah's Ark. We'll discuss the points made in the Bible about Noah's Ark and compare them with modern scientific thought, or so Richard and I think. Joining me today is the Vice President of Outreach for the Reno Freethinkers, Mr. Richard Evans, and a minister?
Sure.
At the Queenway Church of Christ?
You got it.
I remembered it. Casey Head.
Hello.
And I am Chris Webster, Vice President of Social Media for the Reno Freethinkers. All right, so we're not going to do a full bio on each of us today. If you want to see what we believe and why we believe, go check out the first episode that we uploaded, and we'll put it right here in the lower thirds, a link for you. That's on YouTube. For now, I'll just say that Richard is an atheist. I'm an atheist and an archaeologist, and I'm only saying that because that'll be important later. And Casey is a Christian and a Young Earth Creationist. So Richard has a statement to start off.
Yeah, actually, I've asked Casey to start
Okay.
this time.
Yeah, so I guess we're discussing specifically the Ark and the flood of Noah's day here in this podcast. So I've got some material I've prepared on that. And Chris mentioned that I'm a Christian. I'm what you might call a fundamentalist Christian, in that I take a very strict and literal view of the Scriptures. I know many today do not. Many religious people, many Christians, so to speak, they may believe in the Bible, but not the flood story, not the creation account, etc. So I do believe those stories. I do believe that they really happen. And I'll explain that here in just a moment in terms of what happened in Genesis chapters 6 through 8 with the flood of Noah's day. And then I'll get into some of the external evidence that I believe exists in support of the flood that happened. So we'll get right into it. In Genesis chapter 6, that's where we find the initial part of this story. God looks down on the world, sees a corrupt world. He sees that every thought and every intent of man's heart is evil and only evil continually. It says later in chapter 6 that the earth was filled with violence. If that tells you anything about the nature of mankind at that time. And so God, it says that he regretted having made man, and he makes a decision to destroy the world using a flood. There was only one man of all the many that existed. I don't know how many existed at that time. I have no idea. But only one man of those who did exist found grace in the eyes of God, and that was, of course, Noah. And so God reveals himself to Noah, and he gives Noah some basic commands to build an ark. And we're given the dimensions of that ark there in Genesis chapter 6. And God tells Noah that at some point, when he determines that there will be 2 of every kind of animal and 7 of every clean kind of animal, that would be brought onto the ark. Now, many ask, I think Richard, in fact, asked me not long ago how long it took Noah to build the ark, and I don't have any idea. I do know that at the end of Genesis chapter 5, that Noah was 500 years old when he had his 3 sons. And then when the floodwaters came on the earth in Genesis 6, I believe verse 11, Genesis 7, verse 6, I think. It's somewhere in that chapter, that he was 600 years old. So it may have taken as long as 100 years, or it could have taken any amount of time under that. But again, I don't know exactly how long.
I concur with that.
Yeah, how long it took. So if you get into Genesis chapter 7, this is where the flood actually begins. And what we find is that God closed the door of the ark, and that it rained for 40 days, 40 nights. And then following that 40 days and 40 nights, it says the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. So just imagine it raining, and you're looking at a puddle, and that puddle may stay there for a week, depending on how much rain fell. That's the idea there in Genesis chapter 7. So it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and then the waters prevailed for 150 days on the earth. Now, a couple of minor details regarding the flood. I'm sure this will come up later. The flood waters, contrary to conventional wisdom or popular opinion, came from two sources actually. The waters came from above and from beneath. In Genesis 7 there it says that the windows of heaven were open, so that would refer to rain coming down from above. There are some Christians who believe that there was a water canopy over the earth prior to the flood, and that this may be a reference to that water canopy being unleashed on the earth in the form of a torrential downpour. But then also it says there that the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now again, some say that this is the ocean, the fountains of the oceans being burst open. Others believe that there were subterranean water caverns and water deposits that came bursting forth through the ground, creating ridges and valleys and so forth. There are many different viewpoints there, but the point is, what I do know is that based on Scripture, the water came from above, the windows of heaven, and from below, from the fountains of the great deep. Now, there was something else. Regarding, I know many Christians even debate whether the flood was local or worldwide, global. I believe in a global flood for a number of reasons. I don't know how much we'll get into this in the podcast, but it does say that the mountains rose 15 cubits. A cubit is about 1.5 feet long from the length of your elbow to the tip of your finger, depending on what cubit you're using. So, you're talking about 20-25 feet above the highest mountain. So, as you know, if you know anything about physics, if water rises above the highest point, it's going to spill over. So if the flood waters were 15 cubits above the highest mountain, then there's reason to believe this was a global flood. We also know afterwards that when Noah sent out the raven and the doves, that they couldn't find a place to land. And also that the flood destroyed all animal life. Otherwise, why didn't God just tell the animals to flee over the mountain? So clearly, I think from the text itself, in Genesis chapter 7, I believe all indicators point to a global flood. Moreover, I think if you go to the New Testament, that Jesus and the apostles refer back to the flood as a historical event. And they used the global destruction that took place during the flood to foreshadow the final return of Christ, which is also believed to be a global event. So there are reasons to believe from the text itself and from other biblical points that this was indeed a global flood. Again, it rained for 40 days, 40 nights. The waters prevailed for 150 days. Noah's on the ark for about a year. The flood rested in the mountains of Ararat. He gets out when God tells him to, makes sacrifices. God establishes the covenant with the rainbow, and life goes on. So that's an overview. I'm sure we'll get into some of the more specific details here, but that's a basic overview. Again, I do believe the flood literally happened. Now, why do I believe in the flood? First and foremost, because the Bible says it happened. If you begin with the presupposition that the Bible is the Word of God, and if it says that a flood occurred, then of course you believe that a flood occurred. So apart from any external evidence, as a Christian who believes in the inspiration and infallibility of the Word of God, I believe it happened, without any external evidence. Having said that, I do believe there is external evidence to support the flood. And so I'll get into some of that, and I'm sure based on what Chris said a moment ago, we'll get into some of this in debate here in a few minutes. I believe that there are two lines of evidence for the flood as a historical event, separate from Scripture, and that would be historical evidence and geological evidence. So to get into some of the historical evidence, and I think I mentioned this in our last podcast, I believe that if you look at all the various civilizations of the world, a lot of them have flood accounts. And I've got a few here highlighted that I'll read, and I'll try not to take too much time here because I know we want to discuss this. The Aztecs of Mexico, and I'm quoting here, this is from J.G. Fraser, Folklore in the Old Testament, Studies in Comparative Religion, Legend and Law, page 107. He said, when mankind were overwhelmed with the deluge, or the flood, none were preserved but a man named Coccyx and a woman named, I'm just going to say X because I can't pronounce this woman's name. But anyways, this man and woman were preserved through what is called a deluge or flood, who saved themselves in a little bark, and having afterwards got to land upon a mountain called by them Calhucon, They had there a great many children. These children were all born dumb, until a dove from a lofty tree imparted to them languages, but differing so much that they could not understand one another. Of course, the Epic of Gilgamesh is a Mesopotamian flood legend regarding a god named Ea who warned a man named we'll call him U, of a coming deluge or flood that would exterminate mankind. He was told to tear down your house and build a boat, and to take up into the boat the seed of all living creatures. He released a dove, a swallow, and finally a raven, which didn't return. When the boat landed on a mountaintop, he offered a sacrifice to Ea, to the god who told him to do this. The Choctaw tribe of America says that long ago men became so corrupt that the Great Spirit destroyed them in a flood. Only one man was saved. He was a prophet who had warned the people, but they didn't listen to him. Now, just as an aside, the Bible in 2 Peter refers to Noah as a preacher of righteousness. So he wasn't just building the ark. And contrary to the Russell Crowe film, where he's kind of isolating himself from society, the Noah of Scripture is said to have gone out preaching about these things. So that would fit this description as well regarding the Choctaw tribe and their flood legend. But they didn't listen to this guy, and so the Great Spirit instructed him to build a raft from sassafras logs. After many weeks, a bird guided the prophet to an island where the bird became a beautiful woman. How about that? And he married this woman, and their children repopulated the world. I'll summarize some of the others. The Aboriginal people of Australia have one. The ancient Chinese have a flood legend as well, where again a family is preserved through this global flood. The flood subsides, and they go on to repopulate the world. And then the Teutonic tribe of Scandinavia has a pretty neat one as well, regarding a mighty wolf named Fenrir, who shook himself and made the whole world tremble. The earth began to lose its form, sank beneath the sea. All living things were destroyed. The earth then emerged from the waves. Mountains rose anew. Men also reappeared, enclosed in the wood itself of the ash tree. And the ancestors of a future race of men had escaped death. And that's from the Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, pages 275 to 277. These are just a scattering of the many that exist regarding flood legends from around the world. And again, they come from all corners of the world. Also, as a separate line of historical evidence, I'll mention this, and I know there is some controversy about this, but I think it's worth mentioning. And this line of evidence has to do with the Chinese culture and the Chinese language. As I mentioned in our last episode, the Chinese have, I think, the longest unbroken civilization in the world, from what I understand. And their language is the oldest in the world, dating back 4,500 years to about 2,500 BC, according to secular sources. So they predate, and their language predates the time of Moses by 700 to 1,000 years. And Moses, of course, wrote Genesis. So based on the timeline of events in the Bible, if you look at the scattering of mankind in Genesis chapter 11, that's when I believe the Chinese civilization would have had its beginning. And then they would have formed this written language. And so having come from Babel, having a common shared history regarding the flood and the creation, when they formed their language, I think we see some of the signs of the biblical creation account and the flood story in their written language. As you know, it's a language made up of symbols. Now, I don't know if I can show this on the screen here, but their symbol for boat is made up of 3 sub-symbols, and I'm not using the right terms there. I apologize to those of you who may be linguistic scholars. But their word for boat is broken down into 3 sub-symbols: vessel, 8, and people. So, of course, hearkening back to the flood of Noah's day, where Noah was commanded to build an ark, and there were 8 people, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, 8 people who survived the flood. Now, I've gone through some of these Chinese symbols. There are a number of them that allegedly confirm the Garden of Eden, the temptation and fall of man, the Babel account in Genesis 11. Some of them are stretches, okay? This is one that I believe is very solid in terms of just appearance. If you go to Google Translator and enter the word for vessel or 8 or people, you're going to find these exact symbols. And then if you enter the word for boat, you're going to find those 3 symbols being matched together. So vessel, 8, and people, I think harkens back to the flood story. So again, the flood happened, then the Tower of Babel happened, mankind scattered, the Chinese form, they write their language, and with this shared common history in mind, when they write the symbol for boat, they, of course, what comes to mind is the Noah account that they would have had as a shared history. So I've got one more thing. It doesn't exactly fit here, so I'll skip over it and move on to the geological evidence. And I won't get into all this for time's sake. If we need to come back to it, we can.
We'll be back to it.
I think
Okay.
actually maybe you can pepper some of this in with the outline that we've got.
Okay.
Because we can discuss it as we come to those
Okay.
key points. Yeah.
So do you want me to go ahead and mention this real quick, or you want to wait?
I think it'll make more sense if we insert it
Yeah,
together.
'cause we're going to get
Okay.
to the geology too.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But Chris, you did mention to me how I would make an outline and he would bring some stuff up and it'd be hard to follow an outline. It's already happening. So I would just two things I'd like to address real quick with what he just went through there. How long ago did the Chinese language come about?
According to secular sources, 4,500 years.
4,500 years.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's going to work about for me then.
But let me ask Casey another question too, just for
Sure.
foundation purposes. When, according to, I guess, biblical scholars or the Bible, when was the book the flood is mentioned in? What book is the flood mentioned in the Bible?
Genesis.
Oh, I was right in Genesis. Yeah, I suppose it is. I
Gen-
don't know
yeah.
anything about that.
Genesis 6.
That's
through
why
8.
you're here. So when was Genesis written, and who is Genesis author? Do we know that?
Yes. The book of Genesis is included in what's called the Book of Moses, the Pentateuch, which would be Genesis through Deuteronomy,
Okay.
and it's all attributed to Moses. And of course, it depends on who you ask, but conservative biblical scholars date Genesis, I believe, at 1400 BC.
Okay.
So obviously, this would have been well after the flood would have happened.
Right.
So Moses is writing about events that would have transpired long before him.
Theoretically, he's getting this information either inspired by God or from just oral history, or
Well,
Or do we know?
I believe that Moses and all the writers of Scripture wrote by inspiration according to what the Scriptures themselves say in terms of them writing by inspiration. Now, no doubt there would have been oral traditions. I know that as I've researched who wrote what books of the Bible, that almost every source will tell you that they would have had oral traditions in mind and would have borrowed from and would have studied these texts and these writings to formulate Genesis, for example, or Deuteronomy, for example. So that's a scholarly analysis. But from a purely Christian, a faith standpoint, we believe, of course, that they wrote by inspiration. So whether they had access to other writings, I don't know. But I do believe that what they wrote was inspired. So even though he wasn't there, I believe God was.
Right.
So God would have known and shared that with Moses accurately.
What I was hoping you'd take him to task on right away is the idea that these stories came from the Bible as opposed to the other way around. These stories existed before the Bible existed and came from, and the Bible copied other stories they've heard, rather than what you're suggesting is the Bible wrote this and all the other people experienced this at the same time. Well, from our point of view, what took place is the Bible's the latecomer. Those stories all were placed way before the Bible because we don't think it's 6,000 years. We think it's billions of years old. So these stories have been around for a long, long time. It's not surprising that other cultures have these stories. The Chinese symbol is an interesting thing. You could look at it, but again, who knows when that symbol was designed? You're saying it was 4,500 years old. I'd have to question that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead with my opening statement then, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And so again, thanks Casey for coming to do this with us. It's great. And I'm kind of going to read through this. The Noah story is the discussion for the day. The facts of this being a totally and easily falsifiable fable, from my view, they're indisputable. The intention to try to claim this as truth and fact is, in my opinion, an insult to our 21st century common sense intelligence. It appears to me as if this story, when it was concocted, paid no heed whatsoever to the idea that at some time someone was going to pull out a calculator and do the math on this. The story is probably among the easiest of the outrageous claims to debunk in the Bible scripture. The Bible deals with in the Bible, this deals with fixed figures. It describes in detail, in clear statements, what is to be done by Noah and what is to be done and was done by God. After reading this tale thoroughly multiple times, I did not see anywhere in the flood story where God offers up any magical, supernatural, or as the indoctrinated like to call it, divine help to Noah, or as to the regrowth of life on the planet. I'm going to be extremely conservative in using figures and math in this presentation, giving Noah every benefit of the doubt whenever it is feasible. If there's ever a point, Casey, where you'd like to adjust these figures, plus or minus, speak up, because there's plenty of room to do this.
Okay.
That being said, I'm certain these objections we have here today are merely scratching the surface of the problems with this ark story. None of us here are veterinarians, biologists, or geologists. Closest thing we have is an archaeologist here, which I'm sure would...
Archaeologist.
Archaeologist.
Oh my God. Not spelled that way.
Oh, it's not?
Which I'm sure would all have deeper objections of their own that I have not thought of professional people would. And this is just stuff that I've come up with. The first question that must be asked in establishing this, and don't answer this right now because we'll get to this, but
Okay.
is this story we're discussing allegorical in any way, or is it fact-based history? And I think Casey answered that already. He answered actually quite a few of the questions I had.
Good.
And we agreed on some things, made some headway.
Mm-hmm.
So my question would be, did God offer up any magical help? And if so, where? If there is any of God's magical help in this story, then really the discussion is over. We can't compete with magic. Anything is possible through magic, and if we want to have a discussion based on known logical conditions without magical interventions being introduced, then we can talk. We need to be intellectually honest, and as you said on Facebook this last week, think for yourself and reason through decisions. We are adults living in the 21st century who have the ability to think for ourselves and not accept illogical statements of any kind, no matter where they are derived from, whether it be on faith or a belief that is the claimed written word of a deity. Accepting a belief on faith is just that. It is a belief without reasoning considered by one's own thought process. It is not thinking for yourself or reasoning through your decisions. That's why it's called faith. But by any dictionary definition, this is true. Now, people can make up their own ideas of what a faith is, and that's what we're going to hear. But if we can open any dictionary and use the definition of what faith is, it's something that you accept without a good premise. In the same manner, I am not biased over any other fictional story. This story is no different to me. Okay, there's lots of fictional stories out there, and I'm not biased towards them. I accept this as a fictional story. The level of logistics which must be ignored to accept this story are abundantly self-evident. However, I would like you to admit your bias and need to defend not only this, but the whole Bible based on your assertion the Bible is inerrant. So if you want to defend this, are you sure you want to defend this story? If we can get into it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Of course. The show's over otherwise. Okay, so how long ago and how long were they on the ark? And I think we've already agreed on that. The amount of years that we can establish that the flood occurred was 1656, is the figures I've researched and come up with. Mm-hmm. And using 6,000 years as the basis for the length the Earth has been around, we've got 4,344 years left, which lines up with your 4,500 year thing with the Chinese language.
Right. So what you're saying is that 1,656 years after creation, the flood occurred, which
Correct.
would make it just about 2,000 or 4,000 years ago.
Right, 4344.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, I'm glad we're able to get this. Now, I will mention this too. Because I did a little research on this. There's other people that think the flood occurred 2,256 years ago. There's different math that's been done. And,
that would be like right before Christ?
Yeah. No, I mean, no. It would be. It would have been 3,800 years ago. So 1,800 years before Christ.
He didn't come in on a cruise ship?
Right.
Jesus?
No? Yeah.
All right.
Not what the Bible says.
Okay, and Casey's
Maybe the
already
Gospel
answered some of
Thomas.
my questions, like I said. I was asking him if it happened worldwide. He says, yes, it did. And I said, how old was Noah and his family when they began building the ark? He says, God contacted him at 500 when he was 500 years old.
Well, no. Well, all it says is in Genesis 5, verse 32, is that he was 500 years old when he and his wife begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Right.
And then it gets into chapter 6 where God looks down upon the world and sees all the corruption. And sometime after that he communicates with Noah. So I'm saying it could have been up to 100 years.
Yeah,
It could have been less. It could have been 80 or 50. It's hard to say.
They took to build the boat.
Right.
Actually, what I figured out was it was actually 100 years. And I don't need to beat this to death. And whether it's 150 years, I don't care. Okay, because the 100 years doesn't make sense to begin with. The longer the time he has to build the boat, the better, right?
Sure. You think?
But let's see. In 6:7, he says, "I will destroy man, and I've created from the face of the." This is the first time he tells Noah about this. Is in 6:7, and it's right then where the Bible says Noah is 500 years old, and then it says he had 3 kids when he was 500 years old, and then the ark was launched when he was 600 years old. Okay?
Well,
so
yeah.
regardless, anyways, from what I'm seeing, God told him this. He has 3 kids, and he's got 100 years to build a boat. Whether it's 50 or 80, I'll go with 50. It doesn't matter. It's better for my argument that way. But the point is, God tells him, build this boat, gather all these animals, and he has 3 kids. So now he's got 3 kids to raise too. Okay? So
He's young, though. He's only 500.
only 500 years old.
He's middle-aged.
And so who knows? So this brings up the next question. Noah dies at 900 years old, and everybody back then is living 900 years old. What's the explanation for that? And when did the turn of events happen that we started only living 70 or 80 years? Because we're feeling kind of cheated here.
Yeah, we have pretty solid biological evidence going back as far as you'd like to take it, that our lifespan has been increasing over the past centuries and millennia. I mean, you can even go back to earlier hominids. I'm not sure how that fits in your ideological time frame, but you can go back to earlier hominids and show that they weren't living to 30s and 40s for years, and that's based on teeth growth, bone formation, and things like that. Well, all we really have with those fossils is teeth and bones, so that's what we have to go on. But that information works whether or not you believe those fossils were planted by God at the formation of the earth or not. He planted them. If let's say he planted those fossils of early hominids that we think are 2 to 4 million years old, he put them at an age that makes sense with our chronology right now. If we go back, we go back just a few thousand years, or even 100 years ago. People were living shorter time frames. So, like Richard was saying, is it ever addressed, or how do you think? Why were people living 900 years and all of a sudden they're living 40 years?
Where was the gradation that took place? All of a sudden, I'm only living 800 years, and then another 2 centuries go by, and I'm only living 700 years, and another 4 centuries go by, and I'm only living 5, and all of a sudden we're down to 80 years.
I mean, Jesus only made it to like 33.
Right.
Well,
I mean, that's what
he was
I was
executed.
saying. During the time of Christ, 200 years ago, what do you figure the average lifespan of a human was during the time of Christ?
well, a lot of questions here.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is all the same line.
Yeah, and this would make a good podcast in terms of debating how the line of human evolution fits into the Young Earth Creationist model.
Yes.
And contrasting Neanderthals and
It's the
Homo
evolution of the
erectus
age.
and right. And that would be a fun discussion to have actually. But to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know why they were living so long.
Right.
All I can tell you, and I was actually talking to somebody this past week about this. It's very tempting to want to speculate on why, and the fact is I don't know.
Does it make any sense, any logical sense?
Well, it doesn't matter if it does.
Okay.
If this is the Word of God,
Okay.
and it says that they were living for 900 years, and that's what you believe.
Which goes back to my statement about faith being not about using your own thought process. It's about believing something because it says it so in a book.
Well, I don't deny having faith. I would argue that the both of you have faith about a number of things regarding evolution or whatever.
Sure.
But faith doesn't discount a logical process or reasoning through. And hopefully some of what I've gotten into can exhibit that to some degree, that I can have faith in something, but still look for evidence and explain this in a hopefully a logical or reasonable way.
You understand the faith that we hold on things that you suggest. We have past experiences to show that faith has reason, and we don't call it faith as much as we call it trust. Okay?
Well,
I trust that if I take this aspirin, it's going to help my headache go away.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have faith that we're going to experience an ice age tomorrow. And we will experience an ice age in the future, but it ain't going to happen tomorrow.
We won.
Well,
Right.
yeah.
So let's not get too off
Right.
topic.
Right.
here.
Let's. Yeah. Exactly.
That's
Exactly. So I found that
But
interesting.
just to really quickly answer your question, the Bible does say that they were living 800, 900 years at that time. I believe in chapter 6, verse 3, when it says, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." I believe, some say that that's how much time would have transpired between this point and the onset of the flood. I believe he's actually reducing the lifespan of man to 120 years on average.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that following the flood, you see the reduction in their lifespan.
Okay.
And then in Psalms it says
what is that at? What note?
Genesis 6:3.
6:3. You're saying that it reduces their lifespan?
Yeah. In Genesis
Didn't catch
6:3.
that.
In other words, God looks down at man and they're living 800 years and they're just all evil and stuff and says, you know what? I'm not putting up with them for 800 years apiece. I'm going to maybe put up with them for 120 years on average. And then in Psalms it makes reference to how man lives
I did wonder what that meant.
for 70 years, if by reason of strength 80 years. So actually within the Old Testament framework, there's a reduction even more to 70, if by reason of strength 80. And then of course without medicine and so forth, we struggled for a long time until medicine kicked up and we were doing better. So what I would suggest to you is that the lifespans here were sustained by God or by an environment that we don't experience today, or a combination of both. But again, I could speculate all day on that, but I don't know in the end.
Okay.
Outside of that's what it says.
So at this point, God talks to Noah and he says, "We're going to destroy everything, all living things on the planet," and all substance was used quite a bit. The word substance was used, but how do you justify this as not a genocidal act?
It's an act of judgment.
It's still genocidal. He's destroying the world. It's genocide.
Well, and this would be a topic for, I think, a different podcast, because it's going to get us slightly off track unless you want to focus primarily on...
But I don't want to get off track on it, but I did want to make the point of this, that this Noah story has genocide involved.
I know that from your perspective, it appears that way. But from a Christian perspective, there's an aspect of God, and certainly of Scripture, that we Christians say that you atheists fail to understand, and that is the justice of God. Now you might understand it academically. Yeah, you Christians believe that God's just, and that's how you explain away these accounts. But for me personally, there's a lot more to it than that. But that would involve us getting into the concept of God's judgment and sense of justice.
Yeah.
When you have to understand,
there's apologists
apologetics, yeah,
that need to take place.
Right, but just one thing I'll point out is that you have to take into account that biblically speaking, sin is a crime against God. Okay, so we can commit crimes out here against our nation and be punished, and we understand that. Now, we can disagree or agree on the death penalty, but in the Bible, sin is portrayed as being a crime against God that warrants God's justice. And their sin was exceedingly great, it says here. And thus, in the eyes of God, this response was warranted.
Let me ask real quick, just for clarification. So, God brought about the flood because was there any innocents that were harmed in this, or was it literally everybody except for Noah and his family were considered, evil or gone the wrong way?
Right. And I really don't know. All it says is that every thought and intent of their heart was evil. So but Noah, verse 8, found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So according to the text, it says every thought and intent of their heart. So all those apart from Noah was evil. Only Noah found grace in the eyes of God, and that he was a righteous man. So it got pretty bad, and that's what I'm saying. It got so severe and so bad that this severe response, we might say, was warranted.
Yeah.
But in terms of innocence or children, I don't know the ratio. I don't know what that would have included. We're not given a breakdown of the population demographics there.
Right.
Okay. So, we've answered a lot of these questions I've already got. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and we're going to start talking about the project of building the ark and collecting animals.
Sure.
I'm wondering, when did they start collecting animals? And along these lines, I want to know, did they have to concern themselves with short lifespans of some species? So in other words, some species had to be collected literally in the last days of before they got on board.
But before we get into this, because we're about to get into a lot of specifics and numbers and things like that, and Casey knows that. Casey knows what we're going to throw at him.
I really don't.
But you've probably heard all this before, the logistical arguments behind the ark. I mean, you've got a size comparison here of the ark with other ships of the day right now, and I mean, anybody honestly in their right mind, without really any training whatsoever, could understand with just a few different explanations that says there's way too many animals, and the logistics of holding that many animals on the ship for over 300 days is without magic, without God, is impossible. So I want to know, before we get into all this, does this all just come down to faith? It's in the Bible, so it must have happened, and I'm not sure how it happened for you.
That's what I asked you, though. Is there any God magic involved?
I love your expression, God magic.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else is it?
Oh, what we would call a miracle or supernatural care.
Okay. Yes.
It's also magic.
Yeah.
Well, it's what you call magic. I don't know. It's semantics. It's not worth debating.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's a position of faith. Now, any person who reads through the scriptures, they're going to read this account, and it depends on your perspective. If you're a Christian, if you're a person of faith, you're going to read it and say, "Oh, wow, that's fascinating." But if you're a skeptic, or you reject the Bible as a reliable document, you're going to view it with skepticism and say, well, this is ridiculous. It depends on your perspective. Most people who are of the Christian persuasion read this and just assume this is what happened. They don't get into the details of it, and so they don't question. There's nothing to question. It is what it is. However, if it's something you want to study further and look into and research, there's a lot of research out there and evidence out there, material out there, whether it's from Answers in Genesis with Ken Ham or various other websites, creation.com or whatever, ICR.org, who have a lot of articles and charts that they've put together explaining some of the logistics of the account. How did Noah fit all the animals on the ark? Were dinosaurs on the ark? What did the dinosaurs eat? How are the animals cared for? How did the animals breed? What did Noah and his family do with the animal waste? There's a cross-section of the ark. This is just from one source that answers these questions from a logistical perspective and tries to provide a physical explanation. But that doesn't mean that this is exactly how it happened.
Right, and I actually downloaded another one like this, and the guy's logistics are completely flawed.
Maybe. And I just want to clarify, this is one man's explanation of how these things may have took place, how these things could have been explained or can be explained physically and logistically. This doesn't mean this is what happened.
Right.
So ultimately, yes, it is a faith position. I'm not putting my faith in what John Woodmorap of AIG wrote. I don't know if that's how you say his name or not. In a 2007 article. I'm not putting my faith in what this guy wrote. I'm putting my faith in the scriptures.
Right.
Okay.
So ultimately, this is just one possible explanation.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go down the line on some things, and we're going to look at this rationally and logically and point out a few things that just don't seem to add up unless you're going to just say, I don't care about all that stuff and I choose to believe in it, la 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 la.
Well,
okay.
I won't do that.
Okay.
That would be annoying, and
Right.
people probably are going to tune out.
I've seen many Christians do it. You're the one that doesn't do it.
Let me first say, I understand why dinosaurs weren't on the ark, because they're not here now, so God decided to destroy them.
Oh no, they were on the ark.
Well, then why didn't they survive?
Well, two of each kind did.
Okay. Okay.
We'll get into that
We'll
more,
get into
sure.
it.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is that if they're collecting all these large animals in advance, they pretty much have to keep them corralled and keep them fed while the ark's being built. They have to go out and collect them, or did God put some thing in their head and they all walk there themselves?
I don't know.
Okay, I didn't see anything in the Bible that said God was going to tell the animals to come to Noah. So Noah has to go collect the animals. He has to literally go trap these animals. Okay.
Right. Well. First of all, and again, we get into all these details. The Bible may say one thing about it, and we want to know a book. We want paragraphs. So a lot of it is speculation in terms of our response.
Right.
But in chapter 6, he does say that you're going to bring 2 of each kind, 7 of the clean kind onto the ark. Then in chapter 7, when the flood is impending, it says here, you shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, male and female, 2 of each animals that are unclean, and so on. And then I will cause it to rain on the earth. Mm-hmm. So it says Noah is to bring them onto the ark. Right. Whether God led them to Noah, then he leads them onto the ark, puts them in their pens.
Right.
I don't know. I have no idea.
And again, I can completely dismiss that he had to go collect the animals and they all came to him. And I can just concentrate on taking care of the animals on an ark. Okay? Sure. But if he had to go collect the animals, I've got some figures that said they would have had to collect hundreds of animals, all 8 people, hundreds of them, all day long for a year. To cover all this, and that's not even 10% of the species.
Okay.
Okay? The insects alone are 950,000 different species of insects in the world. If I went 10% of that, it's still 3 bugs a day for each of the 8 people that they had to go collect.
Right.
Okay? And you're not going to take all these bugs and put them in one big aquarium and stick them in a corner. They've got to have temperature controls, humidity. Some are dry, some are not. These animals would not live. The time that they were on the ark, I figured in the Bible, was 375 days. It clearly says it was from the 17th of the first month of the year when Noah was 600 to the 17th plus 10 days when he was 601. So it was 375 days. There's just no way, and I'm skipping ahead here a little bit, there's no way that these animals, dinosaurs, elephants, 450 different species of ungulates, which are hoofed animals, are going to be on this boat that's pitching and turning and twisting with no method of steering for 375 days and live. No veterinary care. Okay? They're not going to live.
Okay. Okay, well, just I wanted to point out really quickly in Genesis chapter 6, and then I'll get to your question. It says in chapter 6, verse 20, that 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. So there is indication that they did
what
come.
Verse was that?
Chapter 6, verse 20. So I apologize for that oversight, but it does say in chapter 6 that they would come to Noah. So he didn't have to go out and trap them. But then he would have put them in the ark, I'm sure. Now regarding the number of animals on the ark, I'll read a couple quotes here. It's important to understand that it never says 2 of every species. It says 2 of every kind.
Right.
And, we could get into a debate on what a kind is versus what a species is. But a kind would be much more, that's pretty some.
Right, and I'm willing to give that. Like I said, even if I gave that up, there's still too many species.
Well, let's look at it, because that's a much broader category. How do you say that word, Chris?
Baraminological.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Current baraminological research suggests that the created kind most closely correspond to the family level in current taxonomy. However, to be conservative in this study, the genus was set as equivalent to the original created kind. As for the clean animals that entered the ark in 7 pairs, it's added a modest number of additional animals, notably bovids or cow-like mammals and cervids or deer-like mammals. Under these conservative assumptions, there were no more than 16,000 land animals and birds on the ark. I'll also add here from John Woodmarap. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. That doesn't sound right. But he's got a question here. How did Noah fit all the animals on the ark? According to the Bible, the ark had 3 decks or floors. It's not difficult to show that there was plenty of room for 16,000 animals, the maximum number of animals in the ark, if the most liberal approach to counting animals is applied, actually. Assuming they required approximately the same floor space as animals in typical farm enclosures and laboratories. The vast majority of the creatures, birds, reptiles, and mammals, were small, the largest only a few hundred pounds of body weight. What's more, many could have been housed in groups, which would have further reduced the required space. It is still necessary to take account of the floor spaces required by large animals, such as elephants and rhinos. But even these collectively do not require a large area because it is most likely that these animals were young, but not newborns. Even the largest dinosaurs were relatively small when only a few years old. So just real quick, this is my own commentary, and this is something I think that we often miss. We assume that Noah had 2 big elephants on the ark. Would God have brought older, bigger elephants on the ark, or would he have brought younger ones, not only to fit better on the ark, but you want younger animals to reproduce after the flood. If you get big elephants who are adult elephants, they're not going to have the same amount of reproduction time after the flood. So he's not bringing big T-Rexes and big elephants and big giraffes on the ark. He probably would have brought smaller ones, younger ones, which would have helped with floor space. Okay. But again, according to Christian scholars who analyze this from a physical perspective and try to answer these questions, they say 16,000 at the most.
Okay.
Would have
there
been on
are
the ark.
there are problems with bringing smaller animals on board. What would those be? What would the problem be with bringing a smaller animal on board? A 2-year-old elephant. For
You
one
tell me.
thing, elephants don't start breeding until they're 10, 12 years old. So they still have to wait 10 or 12 years to start breeding after they get off.
I never said they were newborns. I
Also-
just said they were young.
2 years old, 3 years old.
I don't know.
Okay, an elephant is full size after 7, 8 years, and they don't start breeding until later. Okay.
Okay.
The other thing is if they're young, their they're not as durable as an older animal is. They could die easier. So there's pluses and minuses to it all the time. You can say they brought younger ones in. Look, what about insects? What about reptiles and lizards that need dry air? How did they keep those alive? There's butterflies that need particular temperatures. How did they keep those alive?
Well, and you're going to ask me a lot of questions that I'm not going to have a direct answer to
Right.
because the Bible doesn't say.
Because it's a ridiculous proposal.
Well, no, and again, let me restate something. I have paperwork here that provides us with logistical explanations for some of these questions, and I'm not an expert here. I'm only reading what I understand others to have researched themselves. Having said that, there is going to be a degree of faith that I or any other Christian has, and so you can narrow it down to a very specific question regarding baby elephants and immune systems. And I'm not a biologist, a zoologist. I don't know, and that's okay with me. Yeah.
Before we move on too much, I want to address the word baraminological evidence.
What's that word?
Yeah, I looked it up, and it's a creationist word. It's a creation system, basically, that classifies animals into the kinds. It was essentially invented in 1990, and it was based on some older Hebrew words that were brought together to make this make sense. But I'll just say, we'll put the word up down in the lower third so people can look it up on their own. But it's, on creationist websites, it's used to help explain the ark and how the animals got on there. On scientific websites, it's widely criticized. So we'll just put that out there and have people put out their own, make their own judgment.
Yeah. What I found in researching this and evolutionary questions is that you name the question, you name the word, the topic, whatever. You're going to find creationist sites and evolutionist sites, and they just go back and forth constantly.
Yeah.
And it really boils down to which position you believe has the most evidence. Because personally, I think you can look at both sides and see their reasons. I can. You probably can't, but I can.
I can look at evidence. I mean, I have the ability to say this thing I've believed my entire life because of, X, Y, and Z is now wrong because of A, B, and C.
New experience
or new information.
Right.
New information. So when it comes down to a word, just to take an example because we're talking about it, like baraminology, that doesn't exist. That is something that was invented so this word kinds from the Bible can fit into the story and make everybody happy.
In other words, there are creation scientists, and I'm going to use that expression, who
I know what you mean by it.
Right, who study these questions, and they have their terms to describe their research.
Well, they're inventing terms to fit the story. See, that's the problem with creation scientists is they're not doing research. They're trying to find answers that fit the answers. They're not looking at questions. They already have the answers. The answers are in the Bible. And they're trying to find the questions that fit those answers. It's the other way around with real scientists.
I think I would disagree. I think that yes, there are times when that's the case. If you begin with the presupposition that the Bible is true, and you're looking at the world to confirm what you believe to be true, if that's what you mean, absolutely. Yeah. But I think that you miss the fact that there are creation scientists who are doing new research regularly, and at the same time, there are, I believe, evolutionary scientists who begin with the presupposition and find evidence that they believe fits their mold. And we can have a debate on that one day because I think there's ample evidence for that.
Well, let me ask you this then: if you have creation scientists that are doing real research, real proper research, where you formulate a question, a hypothesis, and then you try to prove or disprove that one way or the other based on the evidence that you gain, okay? And you're not going off the Bible as your end point and trying to fit that, okay? So if they're doing real science, then that would seem like we wouldn't even be sitting here having this conversation because the majority of the scientific evidence and the body of scientific work out there for the last several hundred years in biology alone indicates that evolution and all that other stuff is the way we should be going. And then you've got this small subset of people calling themselves creation scientists that are also apparently doing research and finding out completely different things. So how are they doing it right and everyone else is doing it wrong when they're all theoretically doing the same thing? And if these guys were doing what you say they're doing, they would come up to the same conclusions.
Well, two things. Number one, there are creation scientists who publish in scientific journals on a regular basis. And I'm not talking about Creation Magazine. I'm talking about what you would consider to be legitimate scientific journals, Science or Nature, whatever. And they're creation scientists who actually publish articles that challenge certain traditionally or conventionally held beliefs in the scientific community. That does happen. Of course, there are scientific journals, creation scientific journals that are very common. That I don't know if you've ever looked at them, but to me, I'm not a scientist, and I can barely understand them because they're above me. I'm just saying that there are some legit scientists out there who call themselves creation scientists. But I would say as well is that the difference, and we're a bit off topic, I know, but the difference between creation scientists and scientists as you would understand them is that creation scientists admit that they begin from a standpoint of faith. Now, I would say, and creation scientists and Christians would say, that evolutionists begin from a standpoint of faith as well, but that's where the disconnect is. Evolutionary scientists, as I call them, they reject the notion of faith and say that they do not have faith regarding their conclusions, whereas I believe, in all fairness, or in all honesty, I should say, that the creation scientists are simply being honest when it comes to their presupposition. They acknowledge that they begin with faith, whereas the scientists reject that notion, even though they use the same methods.
They start with evidence. They have evidence in front of them.
Well,
there's no faith involved in it when they look at a piece of evidence and analyze it. That's not faith.
Well, we can debate that in another podcast.
It's not even debatable. It's
you would say this isn't debatable, but we're debating.
It's a fact that they have evidence in front of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get back.
So
let's get back.
Are you agreeing then by your previous statement that this is debatable?
This is totally debatable. Okay. Yes, we are here having a debate.
All right. Good.
Okay. I want to talk about life. Okay, we need to determine what is considered life, created by God in Genesis, and what was to be destroyed in the flood. So I'm going to do something Casey likes a lot, and I'm going to read some excerpts from Genesis to bring to light exactly what it is we're talking about here in context of what took place before and after the flood, starting with Genesis 1 and moving and on through Genesis 7. Only the pertinent statements. In Genesis 1:11, it says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed in the fruit, the tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is itself on the earth." So it's talking about grass and plants. In Genesis 1:21, it says, "And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl of his kind. God saw it was good." Genesis 1:20, "Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abound according to their kind, every wing," and so on, "being fruitful and multiply." Genesis 1:29. "And God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, that it shall be for food." Do you agree that a plant is alive?
In one sense, yes.
In what one sense is a plant alive?
Yeah, I'm not a botanist, and I'm sorry, I can't explain to you from a scientific perspective. Maybe you can, or Chris can.
Is a plant a life form?
It's a form of
a
living
form of
in
life.
one sense, but it's not living in the same sense that we and animals are.
No, we're not living in the same sense that a microorganism either.
Okay.
But a microorganism is an animal.
I don't have a precise answer for you because that's not my
I just
field of
want
expertise.
an honest, an intellectually honest answer that says yes, trees and grass and flowers are living things. If we found plants growing on Mars, would we say, "Oh, we didn't find life on Mars"?
Well, and I'm sure we would,
Of
because
course.
they are living in one sense.
They are living. They are living things.
Right.
And the Lord said in Genesis 6:7, the Lord said, "I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping things and fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them." Genesis, that was actually the King James Version. The New King James Version is a little different. He says, "For I'm sorry," rather than repenteth. In 7:4, he says, "For after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain, and 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made." Okay? He talked about making great whales up here and living creatures with the waters, and he talked about birds, and he talked about plants. And in the first time he talks to Noah, he says, "For after 7 days," and I don't get the 7 days part. You might be able to explain that to me. I don't know what the 7 days has to do with anything. "I will cause it to rain for 40 days, 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made." I'm assuming anything that's alive on the planet, God made. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. "All flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. So he destroyed all living things which are on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping things, and bird in the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him on the ark remained alive." And these are important things right here. It says, Genesis 7, it says, "I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made." So, was all life destroyed on the earth other than what was on board the ark?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is a microorganism life?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Bacteria is life.
But
plants are life.
But keep in mind, fish weren't on the ark.
Okay. Okay. Fish are life.
Yeah.
And so are whales. Okay. Mm-hmm. It says he destroyed all living things that I have made in Genesis 7:4. So when they got off the ark, there was no life whatsoever. No microorganisms in the ground that are used to fertilize the ground, break down biomatter and bacteria. Noah would have had these organisms with him on the ark. It's really clear here that it says all living things were destroyed.
Well, see, I can't win this with you because my response is that you've got to take into account context. So any explanation I give to you to explain this problem
is
going to be seen as explaining it away.
This is all we have.
No, but I would say to you that in context, God brought 2 of every kind, 7 of every clean kind onto the ark. There was Noah and his family. Mm-hmm. When it says that all life was destroyed, I think in context what we're talking about is all life that was, how can I say this? So the 2 of every kind and the 7 of every clean kind, mm-hmm. all the others of those kinds were killed off. That doesn't include literally all in terms of whales and fish and some insects. And you're still not getting the
implications of what you're saying right there then. If we go with that and we say there were only 16,000, I'm jumping ahead here real quick. You are a huge believer in evolution. You believe in evolution way beyond me.
Right.
Because 4,344 years ago, there's 16,000 different things, and today we have millions.
Yeah, adaptive radiation.
That means that would mean, Casey, that daily new species are coming in by the hundreds. The math, if you do the math, daily there would be new species coming into existence.
Well, see, I'm hesitating because we're out of time, or I don't know how much we're going to cut out.
We might split this up.
Okay. Okay.
You can't have it both ways.
But no, I believe that insects, fish, would have been excluded from the ark. It says
They're
as
not
much.
Life? They're not life?
Well, fish weren't on the ark.
It says all life.
I understand that, but if you go back to Genesis chapter 6,
let's go back there. Show me something there that says that he wasn't what he's talking about. I mean, it's really clear in 7:4.
Yeah, verse 19. Genesis 6, verse 19. "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, mm-hmm. to keep them alive with you. Mm-hmm. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, mm-hmm. of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing on the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive."
Yeah.
The question is, would fish need to escape floodwaters?
Let's talk about that.
But moreover, they're not specified in that which was added to the ark.
Were the oceans salty at that time?
Were they?
Yeah, did oceans have salt in them? They do
I'm
talk
assuming
about
so.
They do
yeah.
talk about salt seas in the Bible. There's places in Joshua where they talk about the salt sea and so on and so forth. Okay. An animal that lives in salt water and an animal that lives in fresh water, most of them can't live and commingle in it. There's salmon Chris mentioned that salmon can actually do that. Okay, live in salt, antsy water. There's a few, But if it's going to rain, it's going to mix with salt water, those animals are all going to die anyways. They can't live in that type of a brackish mixture of water. Okay?
Just on that note, again, we've agreed that I believe in evolution to some extent. I believe in microevolution. I believe that after the flood, that adaptive radiation, that is extreme environmental circumstances which accelerate evolution, which you would accept, Chris would accept, I'm accepting.
Okay.
That there would have been
it either accelerates evolution or kills the species.
Right.
If they don't evolve, they die.
Right.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to your question about dinosaurs, possibly.
Okay, so how many of the 16,000 animals died? That even increases the amount of adaptive radiation you're talking about for all these new species that we have today.
Right. But my point is that regarding fish, whether they live in salt water or fresh, I know that they can commingle, they can live in both environments for a time. Some can survive in both environments indefinitely.
For 375 days.
Right. And all I'm saying is I don't know the exact answer to that question. That's fine with me.
Yeah.
And that's fine with most Christians. But after the flood, I don't know that there was that distinction prior to the flood. If it came about after the flood, I don't know.
So I love it when you say I don't know. Just keep saying I don't know, because you're going to say I don't know to the point where you finally have to say I really don't know if this can be true.
No.
That's what you're coming to.
Let me interject something here too, Casey, because we're not. I mean, we keep going back to the Bible because that's the source material.
Well, that's what we're
working
debating.
from,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
that's fine.
But I don't think what we're really like asking you is what's in the Bible. I don't think we're asking you to explain what's in the Bible.
Right.
I think we're asking you to personally explain, if you take that one tiny little thing out that says, I believe it because it's in the Bible, and you just look at it objectively, does it make sense?
Right.
That's
Right.
what we're asking.
Right. No. And let me just restate something. I've said it a couple times, but we keep getting away from it. I begin with this, and this is where I put my faith. All these physical explanations, when you ask me about fish, salty, non-salty, when you ask me about how these 16,000 potential kinds would have evolved after the flood, when you ask me about how they all could have fit in the ark, I can provide to you research. I can give you research. But again, my faith is in this book. So I'm perfectly fine with saying I don't know. To you, that's a problem. For me, it isn't.
Do you understand this research is designed to answer the questions in that book? It's not real science. It's not science.
It's no different than what any scientist would do.
It absolutely is.
Hold on just a second. In other words, if you take a controversial or complicated field of study or a question of some kind about evolution, any scientist who's an expert in that field or who has studied that field is going to provide some explanation for or answers to those potential questions. Now, to someone on the other side, they may or may not make sense. But all this is the research done by one man who's a biblical creationist who looks at these questions and says, here are common questions and here are some answers. But this isn't meant to be exhaustive, and there's a lot that we don't know and can't know. It happened a long time ago.
I downloaded another guy like that was going through it, and I was started reading through, and I said, "This just doesn't make sense." And he's trying to make it make sense, but he's leaving out all kinds of things.
Right, and just for fairness, I will say that if this were a podcast on the aspect of evolution, macroevolution, how it happened, how sexual reproduction evolved, I'm guessing that we'd run into some I don't knows from your perspective as well.
Oh.
From either side, there are going to be I don't knows because it happened a long time ago. So I can provide to you some explanations. I can give you some answers, just like you could probably give me some answers for that question.
Yeah.
But in the end, it is a faith position because we weren't there, and all we can do is the best we can.
We are very happy with I don't know. I don't know is a good answer. It's an honest answer, as I've said before.
Would you agree that Christians are even more okay with I don't know because we acknowledge and admit our faith up front?
I'm glad you do, and I'm glad I'm hearing you say I don't know.
Sure.
Okay, I'm glad I'm hearing you say that, and you're not trying to address it in other ways.
I tell people all the time, it's better to say I don't know than to make up a stupid answer.
This is all stupid answers.
Well, I know it is
It's
from your
stupid
perspective.
answers. No, that's not my perspective. It's from the world we live in. It's from science. Look, you can't take that many animals. Okay, I was going to go here. Okay,
Visual? Are you giving us a visual?
Yes. This is the ark.
I'm a visual learner.
This is the ark.
Yeah, I'll hold
Okay,
it up.
that's the space of the ark. This kind of design, 45 cubits by 30 cubits by 450 cubits. If the ark was made like this, there's no way this is going to float in the ocean. This is going to do this in the ocean. Okay, with everything on board. Okay, an ark has to be made like this. The boat's got to be designed like this. Not only that, the boat has to have some source of power to be able to direct it into the path of waves. Mm-hmm. If a wave hits this boat like this, it's going over.
Right. No,
Okay?
no one ever said it was a box.
Okay, good, because if you take the amount of this box and you turn it to this shape, you're cutting out a whole lot of volume, and the ship's even smaller than what they're going to be saying.
Right.
Okay. It's half the size. If they make it like this, even a ship like this, though, Casey, has to have power of some type. A boat like this will not survive what you suggest. Jets are shooting up out of the ground and thunder's coming down for 40 days, 40 nights, and all the animals aren't here. And this boat shifts like this, and all of a sudden all the animals tip to one side. This thing's going to capsize. Mm-hmm. Okay? Not to mention, okay, 150 days, the rain, 40 days, 40 nights, the rain's coming down, 150 days the water's doing this, and this thing's on here, and we've got animals on there.
Are you a shipbuilding expert?
No, you don't have to be an expert to know this.
Well, what I'm saying is that you're making an absolute claim about something that you're not an expert in.
Oh, this, Chris, is a sales. You know that when you on the ocean, you have to point into a wave. Mm-hmm. You have to point the boat.
But no one ever said it didn't have a prow. No one ever said it.
But if
it
there's
was a
no
box.
power, to turn the boat into that wave and be navigating, you can't just put a boat in the water and have it go like this.
Well, and then let me just say one more thing, and then I've got something I want to read. We're talking about the physical answers, the physical explanations. I'm not discounting, nor should we, in the context of this discussion, mm-hmm. forget that God is at play here.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. If God's going to enter into God magic, then I can't argue. Okay,
so I win. I win the debate.
You're right in that case. Here's one more thing I'll say on this. With this boat on the ocean doing this all day long for 375 days,
you're making me seasick.
Okay, these animals are going to become stressed. They're going to become physically and mentally stressed. There's no rest. They're sick. They're land animals. They're cramped. They're going to die.
Yeah. Well,
God kept them calm.
You're contrasting, ideal care versus extreme care for a limited time. But let me read this real quick. This is from Answers in Genesis. I know you don't like that, but oh well. Noah's Ark was the focus of a major 1993 scientific study headed by Dr. Seon Hong at the world-class Ship Research Center, CRISO, K-R-I-S-O, based in Daejeon, how do you say it? Daejeon, South Korea. Mm-hmm. Dr. Hong's team compared 12 hulls of different proportions to discover which design was most practical. No hull shape was found to significantly outperform the 4,300-year-old biblical design. In fact, the Ark's careful balance is easily lost if the proportions are modified, rendering the vessel either unstable, prone to fracture, or dangerously uncomfortable. The research team found that the proportions of Noah's Ark carefully balanced the conflicting demands of stability, that is resistance to capsizing, comfort, that is safekeeping or seakeeping, and strength. In fact, the Ark has the same proportions as a modern cargo ship. And I just want to add that this Dr. Seon Hong is not a creationist. Okay. The guy who did the research. Mm-hmm. This actually wasn't let's test the biblical ark. It was a study of ideal ship models, mm-hmm. and they determined that the same proportions and design for the biblical ark is ideal mm-hmm. across the board.
Yeah, I read the same kind of a thing in the paper I did this morning. That's hogwash.
Oh,
it's hogwash.
Well,
this shape is not conducive for a boat.
I never said it was a rectangle or a tissue box.
That is the shape.
Or a box. Does the Bible say it was a box?
Okay. If it's not a box, then it has a hull, right?
Well, listen. There are people that have put a lot more research into this than I have. And where is it? This is the hull design, mm-hmm. and you can see it has
a curve at the bottom.
Curve on the bottom. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they probably
You can see it. Sure.
There you go.
Yeah, that's not going to make the difference.
This is a cross section of the ark.
That thing will tumble in the water.
Well, if you're an expert on the matter,
It doesn't take an expert.
Well,
It really
I'm
doesn't.
not either. I don't profess to
It
be.
really doesn't.
I don't profess to be.
There has to be some type of a keel on it, and there has to be power, especially in heavy waves. If there's no power to control the boat, it's going to capsize.
All right, well, that's the end of the first half of this discussion on Noah's Ark. We'll have the link for the second half down here, hopefully in the notes and probably in the lower third, and go check that out. So we'll sum up. We'll have some summaries to what we're talking about here in the end of the second video.
Give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. Give me that old time religion. It's good enough. It's good enough. It's good enough.